This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. A sit-in protest continues in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, as authorities say at least 9 people, including 3 policemen, have been killed over the last 2 days. The battle for Libya's capital, Tripoli, intensifies between rival forces. Dozens have been killed and injured and thousands displaced. The First Lady of Rwanda opens a memorial park in honor and remembrance of genocide victims 25 years ago. Also in the program, take a look at this. We meet Nigerian sculptor Nkwocha Ernest, whose art is helping clean up the streets of Lagos.
There's a crocodile I did. I was moved with the tire I saw. The texture of the tire reminds me of the texture of the back of the crocodile.
And in sport, Nigeria's Super Falcons continue their preparations for the World Cup with a friendly against Canada. Find out how they fared. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. We begin in Sudan, where for 3 consecutive days, protesters have held a protest in front of the Defense Ministry in central Khartoum. At least 9 people, including 3 policemen, have been killed since the sit-in started. On Monday, security forces fired tear gas to disperse the protesters who've been calling for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir. But elements of Sudan's military acted to protect protesters. Well, the BBC's Ansoy has this report.
Incredible scenes outside the army headquarters in Khartoum. Civilians and the military on one side as the soldiers fire at an unclear target. Witnesses say they were responding to gunfire from security forces. That would be hugely significant at this point. Then, celebrations follow as crowds surge forward. A soldier is filmed hugging a civilian. Through the day, this has been the mood in the streets of Khartoum. And here's why the protesters are happy. The military has shown no opposition to them. But the army chiefs haven't expressly declared their support for the protests either, at least not just yet. Earlier in the day in Parliament, the government struck a defiant note.
While breaking up the protests last Saturday, 6 civilians were killed in Khartoum and another one was killed in central Darfur. 2,496 protesters were arrested. Also, 3 policemen were killed and 270 injured. This is evidence that these protests are not peaceful.
Since Saturday, Sudanese have camped outside the army headquarters. These are the biggest crowds seen since protests began in December. And they vowed they won't leave until the president quits. Organizers have called for direct talks with the military. They are demanding for a transitional government. But Omar al-Bashir is showing no sign of stepping down. Thousands are prepared to spend the 3rd night in a row here, right next to the president's compound, waiting for him to heed their call. Ansoy, BBC News.
Well, joining us now is Ahmed Solomon, a researcher on the Horn of Africa with the Africa program at Chatham House. Thanks for taking time to talk to us. Ahmed, how shaken, if at all, is the president by the fact that there are some elements in the military who actually came out to protect the protesters?
I think this is a really significant development in the 4 months of attritional and sustained protests that we've seen in the country. I mean, the president has, of course, been affected by the protests up until now, but now we're seeing that there is a focal point over the last 24, 48, 36 hours. Now protesters are camped outside the army command, and they are calling for the armed forces to join them and to back their side, whereas President Bashir has made his government increasingly, sustained around the armed forces, around the army providing stability and security in the country. So this is, they're fighting for the same constituency almost.
But what is happening within the military itself? Should he be worried?
Yes, well, what you have is a very, I guess, loyal Army High Command. The first Vice President, who is also the Defence Minister, the Chief of Staff of the Army, who have come out in support of the President and said that they're focused on maintaining stability and security in the country. But there's a difference between that and the intelligence services, who also have an armed force, who were sent to break up the protests and remove them and disperse them from where they've been protesting. In that regard, the army has, or elements of the army, I should say, maybe the rank and file, the middle sections of the army have supported the protesters, have come to their defence, and this is what we're seeing. And so there is a divergence in the different types of armed forces and their response. We don't know how that's going to continue and pan out, but it's an interesting element that we've seen, and it comes directly as a response to the protesters kind of targeting the army for their support.
I'm wondering, given the fact that this has been one of the most sustained challenges for Mr. Bashir's rule, how is it that he's still able to stay put?
Yeah, he's a man who has created a real deep state around him, and a web of security services, of the armed forces, political forces, as well as economic forces around him, and he's spent the last 30 years working to insulate this regime. So it's not easy to bring down. He also has incentives to stay in power, of course, people around him that want him, that have vested interests, that want him to stay in power. He's of course got international sanctions against him with the ICC, and that will be a reason why he wouldn't want to step aside, because he would be open to prosecution without some sort of a deal being made. And there are elements within Sudan that I think would want to see Sudan move forward without the current government, and have more of a democratic, plural government take its place. But there are also elements that would say, well, the president and those who have worked with him need to have some justice and accountability.
All right, so just quickly, so we have seen protests, but it's not been very clear what the end game is for the protesters, what the transition looks like, what they really want. Are they ready? Are they prepared? Does anyone know how they want to go about this if the president decides, I'm stepping down?
There is a lack of clarity, and a lack of clarity as to who would step in, whether it would be from the government side. People speculate that it could come from within the military. Of course, the protesters would like to see democratic transition, but there's a broad spectrum of those people, protesting from young university students, some of the traditional political parties themselves, who make up part of the Declaration of Freedom and Change with the Sudanese professional associations. And we don't have a clarity. They do have a platform and a council which they are trying to set up, but we don't have clarity around who would emerge as the next leadership and what that transition, be it somewhere in the middle ground, would look like. I think that negotiation is still taking place on the streets.
All right. Ahmed Solomon, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines. Nigeria's government has ordered foreign nationals to leave mining sites in northwestern Zamfara state within 48 hours, blaming them for an upsurge in banditry and kidnappings. Also, all mining activities in the area have been stopped with immediate effect following weekend protests in the capital to urge the president to take decisive action to end criminality in the state. Now, a Kenyan woman who gave birth to quintuplets prematurely about a month ago has died. Evelyn Namuhula had resisted pressure from elders in her ethnic community to kill 3 of the 5 newborns for what they said was a bad omen. She passed away on Sunday due to a blood clot. Now, a South African court has ruled that Mozambique's former finance minister, Manuel Chang, should be extradited to the United States, where he is wanted for corruption charges. U.S. authorities issued a warrant last year after accusing him of involvement in a $2 billion debt scandal in Mozambique. He was arrested in South Africa in December. And Tanzania plans to ban single-use plastic bags by July this year. The announcement comes after Kenya called on Uganda and Tanzania to take action to prevent cross-border smuggling. Kenya introduced one of the world's strictest bans on plastic bags 2 years ago, penalizing the use with 4 years in prison or fines of $40,000. Now, in Libya, fighting has intensified between forces opposed to the internationally recognized government and others nominally allied to it. Now, both sides have also carried out airstrikes. Dozens of people have been killed and injured over the last 5 days of fighting. Now, the UN has been appealing for an urgent humanitarian truce. But how did the country get here? Well, Libya has been torn by violence and political instability since Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was deposed and killed in 2011. A disputed election 3 years later led to a bitter conflict between a new UN-backed government and an opposing group based in the east. Now, since then, the UN has attempted to broker a political deal between Libya's eastern-based rogue general Khalifa Haftar and Prime Minister Suraj, but so far it has failed. Since Thursday, General Haftar's forces have been attacking the capital from the south, and there have been reports of airstrikes carried out by both sides. Well, joining me now is Nabila Ramdani. She's a journalist who specializes in North Africa and the Middle East. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. So there are very many questions surrounding what is going on, what has happened in the last 48 or so hours. Is Khalifa Haftar really serious about taking over Tripoli, or is he just posturing?
Well, Khalifa Haftar was born in Libya, and he played an integral part in the development of his country recently, and he very much sees himself as the future of Libya, and as such, he wants to see Tripoli as his capital, just as past leaders have done. And don't forget that one of the greatest influences on Haftar was Muammar Gaddafi. They both served in the Libyan army, and Haftar assisted in the 1969 coup, which brought Colonel Gaddafi to power. And despite turning against his mentor, as it were, in recent years, in later years, remember in 2011, Haftar joined the so-called rebel forces against Colonel Gaddafi. Haftar is nonetheless very much a warlord in the style of Gaddafi, and Gaddafi-style warlords want to see Tripoli as their capital city. So
I wonder, though, who is behind him, who is supporting him, because it's not really easy to carry out airstrikes just so easily.
Well, absolutely. I think, one would have noticed that there's, an awful lot of pragmatism in the approach by the international community as regards Libya. And by this, I really mean extreme cynicism. Of course, the one wants its own strong man in place in Libya, while other countries, such as Russia, want to see their own proxy ruler. And it's no coincidence that Russia is firmly supporting Khalifa Haftar, and there are very well-grounded claims that they are, backing his quest for power. And don't forget that Libya is one of the richest oil states in Africa, and there's no doubt that the Western powers who militarily intervened in 2011, including Britain, France, and indeed, America, had in mind, were very keen to exploit all this.
All right, so locally then, if, say for instance, he manages to take over Tripoli, or he manages to take over power, what are the implications within the country, briefly?
Well, Haftar is currently trying to portray himself as a strong man who will bring unity to Libya, and who, Libya is inhabited by a tribe which are notoriously difficult to control, and he says that he can achieve that. But he will rule Libya with a rod of iron, no doubt about that. And he is claiming that he will be able to even control sinister groups such as Daesh and Al-Qaeda, which are in place place in Libya under control, and that he will very much try to use this to get the West on side.
All right. Nabila Ramdani, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Sophie Ikenye. Still to come, Peter with all the sports news. Find out why this couple here were the real winners of Sunday's Great Manchester Marathon. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Now, Rwanda's First Lady, Jeanette Kagame, has inaugurated a memorial park in honor of genocide victims 25 years ago as the country continues to mark 100 days of mourning and remembrance for the over 800,000 people who died. Meanwhile, President Paul Kagame has once again pointed a finger at the international community for not doing enough to prove it has learned from neglecting Rwanda during the genocide. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi reports from Kigali.
The Tree of Life. First Lady Jeanette Kagame planted this seedling as she opened Rwanda's Garden of Memory. The tree will form part of a forest that will honor natural vegetation which hid hundreds of thousands who were targeted in the genocide. The garden is thought to symbolize life and rebirth after the genocide, and the stones to remember the lives lost. When complete, this Garden of Memory is expected to be a nice, quiet, green place for the people of Rwanda to come and dialogue about the genocide. A place to reflect and to never forget. 25 years on, Rwanda has risen from the bloodbath and destruction and is a thriving economy. But the country is still seeking closure with those it accuses of aiding the genocide. Kigali has accused France of training the militia who conducted the genocide and demanded an apology before, but it hasn't been forthcoming.
People have asked us whether what we need from France or from anybody has been an apology. And our answer has always been no. You can't ask people to apologize or keep asking them to apologize or tell them how to apologize. Then that, after all, kills the whole meaning of an apology.
But France and Rwanda have been trying to repair relations for years, and last week the French President Emmanuel Macron appointed experts to investigate the role of French soldiers in the genocide. The process will last 2 years. President Paul Kagame also decried the pace at which the international community is taking to repatriate or prosecute genocide suspects. Some genocide suspects remain at large in exile, and the president says the international community must do more to prove it has learned its lessons to prevent a similar incident in the future. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Kigali, Rwanda.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. Nigeria's Super Falcons continued their preparations for the Women's World Cup later this year in France with a 2-1 loss to Canada. The Falcons had taken the lead in the 26th minute via a mazy run from Desire Paranozier. Canada got back on level terms through Becky Janine when she scored in the 48th minute. A header from Schmidt 10 minutes later gave the North Americans the lead, which they held on to till the end. Now, Mamelodi Sundowns coach Pitso Motsimane is looking to curb fans' expectations after their record-breaking 5-0 win over Egypt's Al Ahly catapulted the South African club into a favourite role in this season's African Champions League. The 5-0 win on Saturday, which was Ali's heaviest defeat in African club competition. And the South Africans could have scored more given their dominance in the game, but Mosimane says they have to show respect as Ahly's Uruguayan coach Martin Lasarte, whose future at Ahly is now under a dark cloud, is a very experienced coach, and there is still a second leg to come. Now, it's being referred to as the worst miss ever in football history as Paris Saint-Germain's Maxime Choupo-Moting squandered the chance to wrap up the Ligue 1 title against Strasbourg. Christopher Nkunku's shot was going in until Cameroon forward Choupo-Moting needlessly got a touch on the line and stabbed it into the post. It all started so well for the 30-year-old as he put his team ahead in the 13th minute. But with the game ending 2-2, it seems Choupo-Moting will be more remembered for that miss. Afterwards, his manager said the forward was lacking in confidence.
He lacks confidence. Today he was very unlucky. He started well and scored the goal, and then he misses the goal on the line. It would have been 2-1 for us. I don't know why he missed. In English we say it's Murphy's Law.
Athletics now, and quite a few marathons across Europe over the weekend. Amongst the winners, another great performance from Kenya's Nancy Kiprop. She took her third Vienna City title in a new course record of 2 hours, 22 minutes and 12 seconds, breaking more than a minute and a half off the old mark. There was also a course record for Kenya's Marius Kipsirem as he won the Rotterdam Marathon, and for another Kenyan, Rachel Mtuga, as she crossed the winning line in Hanover. And a memorable Sunday for Ethiopia in Rome as it enjoyed a clean sweep of podium places in both the men's and the women's races. Tebalu Zewudehei won the men's event with Alemu Mengertu taking the women's title in another course record. And finally, two runners who had just competed in Sunday's Manchester Marathon got more than a medal at the finish line. Young couple Sean Truett and Lucy Goddard came away newly engaged. Elite runner Sean got down on one knee to pop the question to his girlfriend of 8 years at the finish line in front of thousands of spectators and fellow marathoners. And she said yes. How lovely for them, you know?
That's nice, Peter, isn't it?
Sophie, they might not have won the marathon, but they did win the marathon.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
I'm absolutely no. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Peter. But
hey, they won themselves, you know.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what you mean. All right.
Thank you. Cheers.
Peter, don't go too far because the next story might be of interest to you, Peter. Art comes in all shapes and forms and can be crafted from anything, and that's what Nigerian Nkwocha Ernest is doing, sculpting artwork from old tires he finds scattered around Lagos.
They call it trash, but I see it as raw material. My name is Nkwocha Ernest. I'm a tire sculptor. Yeah, I've been doing this close to 7 years now. So sometimes, some of the tire really gives me an idea on what to work on. There's a crocodile I did. You know, I was moved with the tire I saw. You know, the texture of the tire reminds me of the texture of the back of the crocodile. So this is where I get my raw material, you know, and I'm trying to sanitize the environment and as well sensitize the people about the usefulness of this material. The tire is like the flesh, and this is the skeleton, which we call it the armature. The most difficult part of this job is for you to conceptualize, have the idea of what you are working. So if you can solve that problem, the work is done. I've been working on animal figures, and I'm trying to deviate a little bit into human figures. In the next 2-3 years, I want my art not just within Nigeria or Africa, but international, you know, exhibition and more open doors.
That's fantastic. Well, before we go, a quick look again at our top story today on Focus on Africa. Protests have been held in Sudan for 3 consecutive days in front of the Defense Ministry in central Khartoum. At least 9 people, including 3 policemen, have been killed since the sit-in started. On Monday, security forces fired tear gas to disperse the protesters who've been calling for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir. But elements of Sudan's military acted to protect the protesters. That's all from the program from me and the rest of the Focus on Africa team. Thanks for your company. Bye.